In a comfortable farmyard at the edge of a peaceful village, where the morning sun painted everything golden and the air smelled of fresh hay and wildflowers, there lived a magnificent rooster named Rupert. He was truly a sight to behold, with brilliant red and gold feathers that shimmered in the sunlight, a tall proud crest on his head that stood up like a crown, long tail feathers that swept behind him like a royal cape, and a crow so loud and clear that it could be heard across 3 farms. Rupert was, without question, the most beautiful and impressive rooster anyone in the region had ever seen. And Rupert knew it. Oh, how he knew it! Every morning when he crowed to wake the farm, he would strut around the farmyard with his chest puffed out and his head held impossibly high, admiring his own reflection in every puddle of water, every shiny bucket, every window pane. He would spend hours preening his feathers, making sure each one was perfectly in place, and announcing to anyone who would listen just how magnificent he was. "Look at these feathers," he would crow loudly to the hens. "Have you ever seen such brilliant colors? Such perfect form? Such undeniable beauty? I am clearly the greatest rooster who has ever lived." The hens would cluck and roll their eyes, but Rupert never noticed. He was too busy admiring himself and proclaiming his own greatness to pay attention to what anyone else thought. Rupert looked down on all the other animals in the farmyard. The hens, he thought, were plain and boring, good for nothing but laying eggs and following him around. The ducks were too silly, always quacking and splashing in their pond. The pigs were far too dirty and lazy. The cows were too slow and simple. And the old farm dog who slept by the barn door? Well, he was just an ancient, useless creature who did nothing but doze in the sun. In Rupert's opinion, none of them came anywhere close to his level of magnificence and importance. The farmer's wife, Mrs. Henderson, would sometimes shake her head as she watched Rupert strutting about. "That rooster's pride is going to get him into trouble someday," she would say to her husband. "He's so busy admiring himself that he doesn't pay attention to what's happening around him. Mark my words, that arrogance will cost him." But Mr. Henderson would just chuckle and say, "He's a fine rooster, though. Best alarm clock we've ever had." What the arrogant Rupert didn't know was that he was being watched. Beyond the farmyard fence, in the shadows of the forest that bordered the farm, lived a clever and hungry fox named Finnegan. Finnegan had noticed Rupert many times, and his mouth would water at the thought of catching such a plump, well-fed rooster. But Rupert always stayed safely inside the farmyard fence during the day, and at night he roosted high up in the barn rafters where no fox could reach him. Finnegan had tried several times to catch Rupert, but each attempt had failed because the old farm dog, despite appearing to sleep all day, was actually quite alert and would bark loudly if any danger approached. The other animals, too, would sound warnings if they spotted the fox. Finnegan realized he would need to use more than just stealth to catch this rooster. He would need to use cleverness. And he would need to use Rupert's greatest weakness against him, his enormous pride and arrogance. One beautiful morning, when the sun was shining and Rupert was particularly busy admiring his reflection in a water trough, Finnegan put his plan into action. He approached the fence casually, staying just at the edge of the forest where he could be seen but could also escape quickly if needed. Then he called out in his smoothest, most flattering voice, "Good morning! Is that the famous Rupert I see? The legendary rooster whose beauty and talent are spoken of throughout the entire countryside." Rupert's head snapped up immediately. Someone was talking about his fame. Someone recognized his greatness. He strutted over to the fence, puffing out his chest even more. "Yes, indeed. I am Rupert, the most magnificent rooster in all the land. And who might you be?" He didn't seem to notice or care that he was speaking to a fox, the natural enemy of chickens everywhere. Finnegan bowed low, his tail sweeping the ground. "I am merely a humble admirer of greatness, sir. I have traveled far just to see if the stories about you were true. They say your feathers shine brighter than the sun itself, that your crow is more melodious than any music, and that your beauty surpasses that of even the most exotic birds. But I confess," Finnegan paused and looked Rupert up and down, "I'm not entirely convinced. You look nice, certainly, but I've seen many roosters in my travels." Rupert's eyes flashed with indignation. Not convinced? How dare this stranger doubt his magnificence? "Not convinced," he sputtered. Why, I assure you, there is no rooster anywhere who can match my splendor. My feathers are the finest, my crow the loudest and clearest, my bearing the most noble." Finnegan pretended to look thoughtful, even a bit skeptical. "Well, your feathers are indeed colorful, I'll grant you that. But the truly legendary rooster I heard about was said to have something even more impressive. A crow so powerful and beautiful that it could make anyone who heard it weep with joy. They said this rooster could crow while standing on one leg with his eyes closed and still produce the most magnificent sound ever heard. But surely that's just an exaggeration. No rooster could really do that." The cunning fox had chosen his words carefully. He knew exactly what would happen next. Rupert, whose arrogance made him unable to back down from any challenge or opportunity to prove his superiority, puffed up even larger. "An exaggeration? I'll show you. I can crow magnificently in any position. Watch this." The old farm dog, lying in his usual spot, opened one eye and growled softly, "Rupert, don't be a fool. That's a fox you're talking to. Come away from the fence." But Rupert was so eager to prove his greatness that he completely ignored the warning. The hens clucked nervously, "Rupert, please, be careful." But he dismissed them with a wave of his wing. They were just jealous of his talent, he thought. Rupert hopped up onto the fence post to give Finnegan a better view. Then, to demonstrate his incredible ability, he stood on one leg, closed his eyes, stretched his neck up toward the sky, and began to crow. Cock-a-doodle-doo. It was exactly what Finnegan had been waiting for. The moment Rupert closed his eyes and threw back his head to crow, the fox leaped. In one smooth, lightning-fast motion, Finnegan jumped up, grabbed Rupert by the neck, and began racing toward the forest with the rooster clamped firmly in his jaws. "Fox! Fox!" screamed the hens in terror. "Rupert's been caught." The farm erupted in chaos. The ducks quacked frantically, the pigs squealed, the cows mooed in distress, and the old farm dog jumped to his feet, barking furiously and racing after the fox as fast as his aging legs could carry him. Rupert, dangling from Finnegan's jaws, felt terror wash over him for the first time in his life. His pride and arrogance had blinded him completely. He had ignored the warnings, dismissed the concerns of others, and walked right into the fox's trap because he couldn't resist the opportunity to show off. Now he was going to die, and it was entirely his own fault. But even in this desperate moment, Rupert's quick mind hadn't completely failed him. As Finnegan ran through the farmyard with the dog chasing behind, Rupert had an idea. His last chance to save himself. If he had been humble enough to listen to others before, he might never have gotten into this situation. But perhaps he could use the same kind of trick against the fox that the fox had used against him. "Mr. Fox," Rupert managed to say, though it was difficult with a fox's jaw around his neck, "I must admit, you've outwitted me completely. You're far more clever than I gave you credit for. But I notice the farmer and his wife and the dog are all chasing you, and the farmer has his gun. Can you hear them yelling, claiming that you stole their rooster? Don't you think you should tell them that I'm yours now, that you caught me fair and square? You should shout back at them that I belong to you now." Finnegan, running as fast as he could with Rupert in his mouth, felt a surge of pride himself. The rooster was right, he had been very clever. And it would feel good to taunt his pursuers, to let them know that this prize was his. Without thinking it through, Finnegan stopped running for just a moment, turned toward his pursuers, opened his jaws wide, and shouted, "He's mine now. I caught him fair and—" The moment Finnegan opened his jaws to shout, Rupert broke free. With a desperate flutter of wings and a surge of energy born from pure survival instinct, the rooster launched himself out of the fox's mouth and flew frantically toward the barn. His wings, which he normally used only for short flights to show off, now carried him faster than he had ever flown before. He didn't care how undignified he looked, scrambling and flapping awkwardly through the air. He just needed to reach safety. Finnegan realized his mistake instantly and leaped after Rupert, but the old farm dog caught up at that exact moment and placed himself between the fox and the fleeing rooster, barking and snarling with surprising ferocity for his age. The farmer arrived seconds later with his gun, and Finnegan, knowing he was defeated and in real danger, turned and raced back into the forest, his tail between his legs and his stomach still empty. Rupert flew into the barn and collapsed in a heap of feathers, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. The hens rushed over, clucking with concern. "Are you hurt? Are you all right? That was so close." The old farm dog trotted into the barn, panting from his run, and looked at Rupert with an expression that seemed to say, "I tried to warn you." For a long while, Rupert just sat there, trembling, unable to speak. He had come within seconds of death, and he knew exactly why. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't the fox being particularly clever, though Finnegan had certainly been that. It was Rupert's own arrogance, his pride, his absolute certainty that he was too magnificent and special to need to listen to warnings or consider dangers. He had been so busy thinking about how great he was that he had made himself incredibly vulnerable. As the day wore on and Rupert slowly recovered from his terror, something fundamental began to change inside him. He thought about how he had ignored the farm dog's warning. He remembered dismissing the hen's concerns. He realized that his arrogance had made him blind to real danger and deaf to wise counsel. And he understood, perhaps for the first time, that his pride had nearly cost him his life. That evening, as the other animals gathered around to hear what had happened, Rupert did something he had never done before. He spoke honestly and humbly. "I need to tell you all something," he began, his voice much quieter than his usual boastful crow. "Today I was a fool. My arrogance nearly got me killed. I was so convinced of my own importance and superiority that I ignored your warnings. I thought I was too special to be in danger, too magnificent to need advice from anyone. I was wrong and I'm sorry." The animals were shocked into silence. They had never heard Rupert speak this way. The old farm dog's tail wagged slowly. "It takes courage to admit you were wrong," he said kindly, "and wisdom to learn from your mistakes. What matters now is what you do going forward." From that day on, Rupert was a changed rooster. He was still beautiful, his feathers hadn't lost their luster, and his crow was still clear and strong. But he no longer spent his days strutting around proclaiming his greatness. Instead, he paid attention to what was happening around him. He listened when the farm dog warned of danger. He thanked the hens for their concern when they worried about his safety. He even acknowledged that the ducks, pigs, and cows all had their own value and importance on the farm. Rupert learned to take his role as the farm's rooster seriously, not as an opportunity to show off but as a responsibility. He crowed each morning to wake everyone, and he watched over the hens with genuine care rather than condescension. He stayed alert for danger instead of being lost in self-admiration. He began to understand that real importance comes not from how you look or how loudly you can proclaim your own greatness, but from how you act and how you treat others. The other animals noticed the change, and gradually their respect for Rupert grew, not because of his beautiful feathers or his loud crow, but because he had learned humility and wisdom. He had become genuinely respectable instead of just demanding respect based on his appearance. But Finnegan the fox hadn't forgotten about Rupert. A few weeks after the first incident, he returned to the farm, still hungry and still hoping to catch the beautiful rooster. This time, he tried a different approach, calling out from the forest edge, "Rupert, Rupert, my friend. I'm so sorry about our misunderstanding before. I've come to apologize and to offer you something wonderful. I've discovered a field beyond the forest where the most delicious insects can be found, food fit for a rooster of your magnificence. Come with me and I'll show you." The old Rupert would have been tempted. The promise of special treatment, the suggestion that he deserved something better than the other animals, would have appealed to his pride. But the new Rupert had learned his lesson. He didn't even approach the fence. Instead, he called back calmly, "Thank you, Finnegan, but I have everything I need right here. And I've learned that anyone who tells me I'm special and deserve more than others is probably trying to take advantage of my pride. I'm content where I am." Finnegan tried several more times over the following months, always using flattery and appeals to Rupert's pride, always promising something special or asking Rupert to demonstrate his greatness. But each time, Rupert calmly refused, staying safely in the farmyard and listening to the wisdom of the other animals instead of his own arrogance. As years passed, Rupert became known throughout the region, but not for the reasons he had once wanted. He became known as the wise rooster, the one who had learned humility through a close call with death, the one who could teach others about the dangers of pride and arrogance. Young roosters from neighboring farms would be brought to meet him, and their owners would say, "Learn from Rupert. He's beautiful, yes, but he's also wise. He knows that arrogance can be dangerous." Rupert would tell these young roosters his story, leaving nothing out, not even the embarrassing parts about how foolishly he had behaved. "I was so busy thinking about how magnificent I was," he would explain, "that I made myself blind to danger and deaf to wisdom. I ignored warnings because I thought I was too special to need them. I showed off at exactly the wrong moment because my pride was more important to me than my safety. And I very nearly died because of it." The young roosters would listen with wide eyes, and Rupert would continue, "Being proud of your abilities is fine. Having confidence is good. But arrogance, thinking you're better than others, ignoring advice, believing you're too special to follow basic safety rules, constantly needing to prove your superiority, that kind of pride is dangerous. It makes you vulnerable because it blinds you to reality. The fox used my arrogance against me, and it almost worked perfectly." Mrs. Henderson, who had warned years ago that Rupert's pride would get him into trouble, would smile when she overheard these conversations. "That rooster finally learned some sense," she would say to her husband. "He had to learn it the hard way, but at least he learned. And now he's teaching others. That's worth something." Rupert's transformation became a story told not just on the farm but throughout the village and beyond. It became a parable that parents would tell their children. "Remember the proud rooster who was so busy showing off that he nearly got eaten by a fox. Arrogance can be dangerous. Pride can blind you. Always stay humble enough to listen to warnings and wise enough to recognize when someone is trying to manipulate your ego." In his old age, Rupert would sometimes stand on the fence post, safely inside the farmyard of course, and look out toward the forest where Finnegan had once waited. He would think about how close he had come to losing everything because of his pride, and he would feel grateful. Grateful that he had survived, grateful that he had learned his lesson, and grateful that he had been given the chance to become something better than just a beautiful rooster with a loud crow. He had become a wise rooster who understood that humility and caution were just as important as confidence and ability. And every morning, when Rupert crowed to wake the farm, it wasn't a boastful proclamation of his own greatness anymore. It was a grateful celebration of another day, a reminder to himself and to all who heard it that life is precious, that wisdom comes from learning from mistakes, and that staying humble enough to listen and careful enough to watch for danger is the way to live a long and meaningful life. The old farm dog, now even older and grayer, would open his eyes when he heard Rupert's morning crow and thump his tail approvingly. The rooster had finally learned what the dog had known all along, that true greatness comes not from proclaiming your superiority but from serving your purpose well, treating others with respect, and staying humble enough to recognize that you don't know everything and you still have things to learn from those around you. And Rupert, the once proud and now wise rooster, lived out his days in the farmyard, his beautiful feathers eventually fading with age but his hard-won wisdom growing stronger every day. His story lived on long after him, a reminder to all who heard it that arrogance can indeed be dangerous, but humility and the willingness to learn from mistakes can save your life and transform who you are.